High net worth individuals and ultra high net worth individuals think that they can get citizenship by investment in 2 weeks. Well, that's not the case.
Welcome back, guys. I'm Rocket Still. Today we have here Marina, and we'll be speaking about citizenship by investment and a bunch of other cool stuff. We're here with Rocky, which is super excited. So let's get into it.
Good morning, Rocky.
Marina Sidwell Kutumova is the director and co-founder of Ascot Advisory Group, a London-based firm specializing in citizenship and residency by investment. What sets Marina apart is having spent years conducting enhanced due diligence for governments and reviewing the very application that determine who gets approved. She now uses that insider knowledge to help clients put forward the strongest possible case. She holds a diploma from the University of Oxford and a master's degree in political science and is fully certified by the industry's top certification body, Investment Migration Council. Outside of work, she can be found road cycling, free diving, or painting.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction. And thank you for having me here today.
You were recommended by Federica, which I will link here, the previous video of Federica from Mythos Relocation. She mentioned you are colleagues, but it's not exactly in the same field. Maybe we can start with that.
Federica and myself, we work in adjacent industries. So Federica specializes in retirement planning, whereas I specialize in residency and citizenship by investment. And the way that we are connected to each other is that I also advise people on relocation strategies and residency strategies abroad. So I would say we complement each other's services in a way.
If I recall the conversation with her, she focuses on people which are sort of ready for their retirement stage, as in when they have planned to retire in new countries and such, and so she will help them. But if I understood correctly, you will help people relocate when they have capital at hand or when there are investments in this case, to make it really practical. Can you tell us about, who will be your typical client here?
I would say there are two different routes that people normally consider when they think about residency by investment or citizenship by investment. Let me start by explaining what residency and citizenship by investment is all about. So essentially, there are many governments around the world which offer citizenship and residency by investment programs, which means that they would offer either a residency permit in exchange for an investment into their country or a citizenship, so a passport in exchange for an investment into their country. So we can think about it as like foreign direct investment in a way. And the investment thresholds, they start from around 90,000 for citizenship programs. 90,000.
Can we put a currency there
Sorry.
for viewers?
Yes, US dollars. And obviously it goes up. It can be 4 million euros. It depends on the jurisdiction that we talk about. Now, there are different investment options. People can invest into real estate, so they can buy a property abroad, and with that, they will get a residency permit. For example, they can do that in Greece. So people can purchase a property or in Cyprus and then get a residency permit in the EU. So that offers some people optionality in terms of freedom of travel if they hold a weak passport, let's say, or they would like to have access to the EU and they would like to conduct business in the EU, then that could be another option, for these people. And it works exactly the same way for citizenship by investment programs. But in exchange for an investment, people get a passport. So, and that obviously they get for life.
This is great to get into the conversation. So that's something I think is an interesting topic also for some of our listeners. And this makes me think, a number of years ago, we were living in Malta. And I remember, if it's still the case, Malta had this type of investment. And I thought, hold on, they're selling passports here. But effectively, these things have been around for a long time, where a country will seek investments for improving the infrastructure, fill the blanks, etc. and then in return they will allow you to live in such a country. But do you think there's a bit of a negative perception there, where effectively people think, hey, you bought your citizenship?
Yes, there is. And I think obviously predominantly it's not from people who would like to obtain these passports, right? It's from, people who are probably already residents of this country and they don't really fully understand how it works. So Malta indeed had a citizenship by investment program previously. It was shut down in 2025. Yes, but I will tell you a little bit more about it because it's not that simple. So Malta's program was shut down in 2025 by the European Court of Justice. So essentially, Malta was being sued by the European Commission, and the reason for it was that people should not be able to buy a European passport, an EU passport, easily, and so Malta lost the case. However, and this is an industry-wide, not just an opinion, but this is an industry-wide sort of conclusion from this case, is that there were no substantial legal grounds to shut down the program. I think predominantly it was all about having that negative perception of the ease of purchasing an EU passport, and so that just did not sit right with the European Commission. So now, although the Citizenship by Investment program in Malta was shut down, Malta still has a residency program. So it's called a permanent residency program. Essentially, people can still invest, into Malta in exchange for a residency permit. And then there is a second option, and that is a citizenship option. However, now it is not called a citizenship by investment option, it is citizenship by merit. So people have to demonstrate their connection to the country, that they have actually made significant contribution to the society. They have actually resided in the country for a long time. They're very familiar with the culture, so they are actually becoming part of the country. They're becoming a citizen. So that's what's happening. So when we're talking about citizenship by investment sector in general, it is very important to take into account the changing regulatory environment, because we can see this shift happening across all programs actually currently. So countries want to see that people who invest into those programs in exchange for citizenship actually are familiar and they know the country that they invest into. They would like these people to actually go and visit, and spend some time there and have that connection to the state itself. And I think it does make sense, and then it could be an excuse to visit, Caribbean islands, right? So there are some of the major sort of citizenship by investment programs are offered by Caribbean islands.
And one thing you opened earlier, you touched on the EU side, no? But we do have some listeners from the US, obviously. Is there such a thing, just maybe briefly on this, is there such a thing as a citizenship by investment, or the new programs you described in the US as well?
There's a golden visa, there is a Trump a golden card, basically.
Which is not the green card lottery.
Lottery, you have to actually invest a significant, amount of funds into the US in exchange for that. Now, we don't work with the US ourselves, so at the moment, actually, there is a huge demand from the US citizens, willing to relocate, and it's predominantly driven by the internal political situation. And so, yeah, this is not something that we have considered so far. And I think this is, being on this, podcast, it's important to say that as an entrepreneur, you have to have a very good understanding of the market environment, right, and see where the demand goes. So At the moment, it's actually there is an outflow of the US citizens.
Okay, okay, super interesting, and yeah, I think this also enables stronger currencies to relocate elsewhere. Because I still think for people in the US, if you have a good business, Europe is relatively cheap, although costs have been going up here as well. One thing related to this, I got just a side question for you. Focusing on the EU, but you're based in London. Did you see more complications post Brexit?
No, actually, it's the other way around. So essentially, the condition for the application for either residency by investment programs in around the EU. So we're talking Greece, we're talking Portugal, we're talking Cyprus. There is Hungary. Malta. The condition is that you are not an EU citizen. So the UK left the EU, which means now it opened an opportunity for people from the UK to, invest into an EU country.
Okay, okay. So before, sorry if I interrupt, before they couldn't apply for the program.
So it actually created an opportunity. So yeah, being located in London is actually a benefit.
That's a good one because after what happened, I was personally contrary, my personal opinion on the Brexit. But this is so interesting. You actually got an improvement in business because we heard stories left and right. Again, people have different opinions, but yeah, for the most part, immigration changed a lot. Again, bigger topics. But thank you for sharing that. Okay, we will switch to a few other questions. Since you co-founded the company, so you at some point had to switch from being the expert to being running a business, and it's never the same thing. Even for me, when I was running my marketing in an agency versus running my own business, things are different. So what do you think was the biggest shift you had to adjust and adapt to when running the company?
I mean, this is a fantastic question. I love this question. So I would say pretty much everything changes. Mostly stress levels go up exponentially. But in all seriousness, when you start working for your own company, when you start running your own business, and to a lot of people, it might seem like a very glamorous idea, but in reality, while maybe there is a little bit of that, um, that wouldn't be completely accurate to say that this is the case. And I mean, the joy you get from running a business that you love, the adrenaline rush, the drive, the great people you meet along the way, it's all extremely rewarding. I would say it's almost addictive. But on the other hand, it also means that you likely won't have, normal days off anymore, or you might be pulling all nighters, completing certain tasks. This is especially relevant at the startup stage. So when you have a limited number of people in your company, and in many cases, startups is just a couple of people, starting off and running a business. There is no, you don't actually have a team of people. So that means that you have to complete a lot of tasks yourself, and thank God for AI. I think there's I don't think there's ever been a better time for running a startup company, than what we have at the moment. So yeah, no, things change completely, and I think um, it's just that you don't have that sort of normal, normal life anymore. But you have to have, I think, that personality, and to be able to run a business and embrace that fully.
Yes, running a business can be stressful many times, but at the same time, you do something that you really are passionate about. And yeah, for me at least, I try to keep the stress level down by limiting certain things where I know that will cause me stress. But that's not simple. You cannot do it all the time. But yes, running side projects, starting. I had more time when since starting my own company to do side projects, for example, such as this one or helping my wife with her heart, which I was mentioning to you. So that's all good. One side note again. You mentioned AI. Gosh, I thought we wouldn't talk about AI again, but it comes every single time. Even our last video recording talking about tea, we talk about AI. So I think here there is one strong point to make that if you do research with AI in these type of topics, which is what you do with your company, it's very risky getting wrong information. So can we tell something about people?
To start with, you know, actually, in many cases, you for many programs that people would like to apply, you actually have to go through an agent. So, I mean, you can do your research, but the application has to be put together by an agent, like ourselves. So that's one point. And I mean, AI can definitely help with that, but you know, firstly, it depends on the skills of the person. Can they write a good prompt for the request that they're putting into their, I don't know, ChatGPT or Claude or whatever? Because there is a lot of information out there, available online. And there are also influencers that would like to, trying to enter this area. And I hear and I see a lot of information that's not being correct, or is outdated. So because it's such a volatile industry, things change rapidly. We get notifications from governments directly about the changes in the program, etc. So yes, you can find a lot of information online, and Google search or AI search doesn't matter, but it's the agents that will be able to provide you with the most accurate information. Yeah. So and I mean, the stakes are quite high, right? So it's a significant investment.
Yeah, thank you for that. The situations are also very individual, so very custom, right? That's what Federica mentioned as well. So same, she gave pretty much the same answer, and I think it goes down again to the experience, right? Because it's very tempting to get those informations there. And again, my last guest, she was talking about tea, and she was even saying that there's some aspects of how to grow tea which AI will get wrong. So something much more trivial as a relocation by investment, you put down hundreds of thousands of euros, possibly whatever currency, and you need the right information, speaking with the expert effectively. So I think that's really key. Connected to this, working with people, what do you prioritize for in establishing long-lasting relationships? What is your ideal client?
We work in a high trust sector, so people have to we have to build the trust with our clients because they share a lot of personal data. We need to know pretty much everything about their life. It's their entire life that we will need to put into the application. And that is exactly, my background is, I used to work for these governments and I used to review these applications. So I was sitting on the other side of the table, right? So I know what happens behind the curtains. I was reviewing these applications. I was assessing them against, risk and threat level metrics. And essentially, when applicants, they have to declare a lot of information. I mean, it has to be done, right? You're applying for a citizenship, so it's not going to be simple. And it means that you have to declare your family members. You have to declare where you live, what you do for work, what is your business, where does the business operate. You have to provide evidence of funds, and that business is actually operational, and that it is actually that business that is generating that money, because there are money laundering cases and things like that. So it's everything about that individual that we need to know in order to be able to put a successful application together and make sure that the paperwork is correct. So building trust with people, and we are talking about high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals here, right? Building trust with these people is obviously not a simple task because, well, first of all, these individuals are extremely busy. Their lifestyle, they don't have time. They don't have time to just talk to, oh, I'm going to talk to this agent, I'm going to talk to that agent, and I'm going to gather. They don't have time for that. Normally, it is actually their representatives that do that job for them. It could be their accountants, assistants, maybe their lawyers. And essentially, you have to be able to build trust with those people before you actually get through to the client. And it is a very long process. And I don't have any objection with with that process. I understand perfectly well the importance of having someone in your team that you can trust. And this is something that I would also like to add, is that when we start working with the client, we become part of their team. We're not just a service provider. We're building that long-lasting relationship, that trust. We are stepping into their shoes, and we are on their side. So we have to help them put together a successful application. So it is essentially it is a long process. I would say it's a it's a high trust industry with a long cycle sale.
Full of stories. So I wanted to ask you this as well. Without going into personal details, of course, was there one particular time where you had to decide whether to chase, let's call it a quick win, versus, protecting a long-term credibility of a client?
I don't think there is actually ever a quick win in our industry, because you can try and make a quick application, but not going to work, right? So you have to make sure that you spend whatever time is needed to obtain all the documentation. And we're talking, it could be an application with 60 different documents here, right? Depending also, like what you said, Federica said, every client situation is different. If it's a family of 4, then it's going to be an even longer process. And if they're all adults, it's even longer. So I don't think there is ever a quick sort of win situation. I don't even think that there's ever been a case when I thought that way, because the stakes are too high. If you don't put together a successful application, and people are paying significant money for the fees, not just to ourselves but also to the government, because the government will then need to conduct due diligence on these applications, and again, all of this cost will have to be paid by the client. And then if we rush something through this process, it just means that the client wastes their time and their money. And that's not a win for us.
In general, do you think people have some misconceptions in their head, or myths? As in, what is the biggest myth people have about citizenship with a residency by investment? For example, let's say the wealthy person says, "Oh, I'll just throw a bunch of money there. I'll pay X. I want everything done in 2 weeks."
There are lots of people who would like to have a very quick application, and undoubtedly, there are programs that are quicker than the others, and we advise accordingly. It depends on what the client wants to get out of it. If they need a quick citizenship, but they want a quick EU citizenship, then I'm going to be straightforward with the client, and I'm going to say, well, this is not actually possible. I mean, there are alternatives, that you can get a faster citizenship, but it's not going to be an EU citizenship. Potentially, it could be a passport that would allow you freedom of travel to the EU, but it doesn't mean that you can reside in the EU with that passport. And then also, I would say another misconception that some people have is related to tax. So people sometimes think that tax is related to their citizenship, or the amount of tax they need to pay is maybe related to their, I don't know, non-dom status or domicile status. And we're seeing the changes happening at the moment in the UK, with the changing regulatory environment in tax regulations in the UK, where it is now residency based. So essentially what that means is that people have to actually relocate abroad in order to benefit from preferential, tax options that other jurisdictions offer compared to the UK. And I mean, there are different countries that have different schemes for that. For example, in Cyprus, it is potentially possible to become a tax resident by residing there for 60 days, and that's extremely low, right? It's extremely, you have to meet certain conditions to be able to do that, but that is potentially something that can be done. But at the same time, it also means that you cannot reside for more than 183 days in any other jurisdiction. So there is a lot of planning behind that, and I think people tend to think about tax residency and like benefits of getting a residency in another country like the UAE. There is there is this sort of misconception. Oh, I'm going to move my business to the UAE, but I'm still going to reside in the UK and I'm going to pay low tax in the UAE and probably applicable to the UK. Yes, yeah, it doesn't work like that. So there is a lot of structuring and planning that needs to be done, and it's most of the times. I mean, it's not that complicated, but it needs to be done thoroughly. So that is one of the major misconceptions, I would say.
As you know, I'm Italian, and we don't live in Italy long time. However, I heard from a while that there are programs available in Italy for foreign investors, which can relocate what I understand everything in their life in Italy for having a very favorable tax rate. Now, I was asking the same question to Federica, and she said that's not my area of expertise. So I was wondering, do you know more about that program? I think they increased the threshold, but it's like a flat fee if you have a certain type of business. But it will not be forever as well. It's like for 5 years max.
There is a program in Italy, a residency program for high net worth individuals, and indeed there is a benefit in terms of tax. Like you said, it's a certain amount that you just have to pay. It's set at one level, and that's 300,000 euros per year. So I mean, for some, and understandably, it's a lot of money, right? But if we are talking about individuals who are thinking, so they have like a net worth of, let's say, 5 million in the UK, or they're about to inherit an estate worth 5 million in the UK. HMRC will take about 2 million out of it, right? So it's 40%. I'm simplifying it, right? But generally speaking, that's the sort of overall image. Now, if you think about the implications of tax residency in the UK, if you are an ultra high net worth individual, it might actually make sense to get an Italian residency because you just pay flat tax of 300,000 euros. And I mean, again, everything depends on individual circumstances, how much money they earn, etc., etc. But yeah, for some people, it might be a very beneficial option.
And people in Italy are being really upset about those programs because they said, hey, there is this influx of sort of high net worth individuals, especially in Milan. And I mean, I don't know all the details, but it was not a pretty situation, no? And they're saying, hey, the government just wants to rake in as much money there as possible, making it attractive. So it's always interesting. In the example you mentioned, that would be, if my math is right, what is less than 1%?
There are important conditions to take into account. So the 300,000 flat tax, yes, 10%, would be applicable on foreign income. So it's not an income that you earn in Italy, because you will still be. So if you do have income coming from Italy, then you will. I mean, it's a standard tax of 43%, I think, from what I remember. So as long as that income comes from foreign sources, then it's a flat tax. Otherwise, it isn't.
Does it mean then, let's say I have a company in Germany, etc., and we do really well, etc. So that means I have to relocate completely, and the company operations have to be running from Italy.
No, no. So it's the other way around. So it's on foreign income. So if yeah, so let's say it's a UK resident and they have a company in the UK, and this is where their income is coming from, but they are now
But they have to
relocating to,
live in Italy, and the company
and the
still
company still
remains in
remains
the
in the UK,
UK.
and this is where they're paid their income, but they are residing in Italy. And so the 300,000 euro flat tax is applicable on all foreign income.
See. Okay, so that's how it works. Okay, thank you so much. I was really, really curious on that. As a founder, there are things which we do really good, but some things which are tricky. So if I ask your team, is there one thing Marina is not good at? What they will say?
Not good at resting. I think I'm quite demanding. So I tend to. So I have very high standards for myself and the quality of work that I produce myself. So that's what I expect from other people. And if I don't get that, then yeah, it frustrates me, right? So maybe that's that's probably something that they would mention.
So you want things done in a certain way, and even me, when I have to find new collaborators, sometimes I think, okay, no, I'll do this myself because I want it done in that way. But then at the same time, if you don't have enough time, then you'll be stretching yourself too thin, which will be then poor quality as well. So okay, I rather spend some time teaching someone else how to do something, right? And I think for a founder, that's the biggest compromise, and what you have to accept, that sometimes you have to understand people and willing to accept things will be done differently, and then
And I mean, nowadays you can outsource a lot of admin tasks to AI and teach AI the way you want things to be done, and that can be running in the background, and there is a low level of human error in that case. Then, but yeah, I it's a balancing act, I think, between technology and having a team of people, because in the sector where I work, it is very important to build personal relationships. So it's important to have, you know, actual people that can build those relationships with our clients. So that's not the sort of activity that we can outsource, let's say, to technology and teach AI how to do. But there are other things like admin tasks that can be done.
speaking of trust, Marina, what is the fastest way a client can lose your trust?
It would be something to do with them hiding information from me. You know, operating in this sector, again, going back to the point that, I am doing everything possible to put together a successful application, making sure that all the documents are correct. And, you know, it's a lot of work, and you have to really understand the situation of the client. But if the client is trying to hide some information, then and I'm still putting together an application, and I have to submit that application to the government, then it makes me look bad for the government because I am sending information that's not correct. So that's I would say that's something that is important for clients to understand, that there is no point in hiding things, because in most cases they will likely be found out by the due diligence companies that are outsourced by these governments. And I'm saying this because I know I worked and I did that work. So yeah, that would be the point.
Last two questions before we wrap up. So, golden visa and golden passports. These are things people have been mentioning quite a lot, but they're not quite the same as what you do with a residency by investment.
It is the same. So people just don't. So in in this industry, there are certain standards that agents have to comply with. So people like companies like our company, right? So you cannot sell a passport. So we cannot market as, golden passport because it's unethical. And it's not what the governments are trying to sell. It's the governments are trying to attract foreign direct investment into their country in exchange for citizenship rights. So that's how it works actually. And golden visas is exactly the same. But with those terms, right, golden visa and golden passport, comes a negative perception of the industry. And that negative perception, I can divide it into two parts. So the first one is that people are concerned about immigration. They are concerned about how that sort of immigration of high net worth individuals is going to affect their lifestyle. How is that going to affect, property market in their country, for example? But if you think about it from a different perspective, these individuals likely hold weak passports. So I like to use the term birthright lottery. By definition, we are not assigned equal passports at our birth. So what I'm trying to do with this business is address that inequality. Because when you hold a weak passport, that means that you have limited travel opportunities. You don't actually have freedom of travel at all. You don't have freedom to choose where to reside, where to work, or where to study. And these are all very, very limiting factors. For a lot of these people, they also want to plan for their children's future. They would like their children to study in good schools, but also they might be coming from unstable jurisdictions, right? So they have worked really hard to acquire their wealth, to build their business. We know it firsthand, how, how hard it can be building a business, right? Um, and then just because the political situation changes in the country, and I mean, we're seeing this in the Middle East right now, right? In the Gulf countries, things can change rapidly. Does this mean that these people should not have the opportunity to plan for an alternative citizenship or residency? I think they should be given that opportunity, and just for the sake of their hard work, but also for the children's future. And then another thing is that lots of these countries, let's say the Caribbean islands, the foreign direct investment, so that when people invest into these countries, there are donation options, there are public benefit options, and that means that the funds that will be invested into the country will be directed at building houses for homeless people. It's provision of benefits to the country that is, I mean, lots of these countries are not extremely developed, right? So I think it's something that I feel responsible for in a way to educate people about that, to make them understand that it's not as simple as just having high net worth individual relocating to, I don't know, let's say Italy, and paying a flat tax rate of 300,000 euros because they have foreign income. Then they might actually be coming from a very challenging situation.
Oh, what you mentioned on the passport, I've seen that firsthand because my wife is originally from the Philippines and we met in London. It's a long story. But after a number of years, we changed, and she changed the citizenship because she acquired my citizenship, and it was a world of difference in our travel options there. Because before it was so tricky. Although we managed to do everything, but paperwork and stuff. And now with Italian passport is not a bad passport to have, and she has no problem whatsoever to travel. She can go on her own wherever she wants, pretty much. So I've seen that first, and thank you for sharing that. If there's anybody you can nominate for our next guest, which is what we like to connect with other people here, who would that be?
I have um, an interesting person that I know through my network. His name is Jan Akalin. He is a serial entrepreneur with diverse interests. That's why I think he would be an interesting person to interview. So he currently runs a bar in London, which also kind of doubles up as a comedy club. But at the same time, he also runs an upsell and bundle software for e-commerce businesses. So it's two completely different,
Okay, that would be an
yeah,
interesting
two
one.
completely different companies. So I think he would be an interesting guest to join your podcast.
Where can people find you, if someone wants to get in touch? What's the best channel?
As a company, we have presence on LinkedIn and the Ascot Advisory Group. We also have our Instagram channel, again, Ascot Advisory. And I myself am quite active on LinkedIn. So people can easily connect with me on LinkedIn, add me, follow me. And I am always happy, to discuss, or answer any questions that people might have. And equally, I'm also present on Instagram. So, it's social media channels mainly. We obviously have a website, but we are also planning to launch a YouTube channel. So, so hopefully that's going to come soon. And maybe by the point this is issued on YouTube, maybe I'll already be able to link it with our YouTube channel.
Fab, thanks, Marina, and you'll find all our contacts down in the description and in the comments section. Thank you so much for participating in today's recording. Me and Rocky learned a lot about citizenship by investment and a lot of other cool stuff.
Thank you so much, Gabriel, and thank you, Rocky. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Really enjoyed it. Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye, bye. Ciao, ciao.